A single father's world shatters when he loses custody of his daughter, until the judge who ruled against him breaks every rule to set things right. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The smell of sizzling batter drifted through the tiny kitchen, warm and sweet, like a promise trying to hold on. Michael flipped the pancake with practiced ease, careful not to wake the sleeping grief that had taken permanent residence in the corners of his chest. Across the room, Lily sat cross-legged at the table, her elbows propped up as she colored in a half-finished picture of a unicorn flying through stars. She hummed softly, off-key and innocent, the sound both grounding and unbearable. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You want blueberries or chocolate chips?" Lily didn't look up. "Both." Michael chuckled, grabbing the tiny containers from the counter. "Living dangerously, huh?" She nodded solemnly, as if making important life decisions from the height of 7 years old. "It's a special day." His hand paused over the bowl. "Yeah," he said softly, "it is." He didn't tell her why. He didn't tell her that in 3 hours, they'd be sitting in a courtroom filled with polished shoes and legal jargon, where her future would be dissected by people who didn't know her favorite bedtime story or how she refused to sleep without her worn-out stuffed bunny named Jupiter. He couldn't tell her that today a stranger in a robe would decide whether they'd be eating pancakes together tomorrow or not. Instead, he served her a plate stacked high, topped with both blueberries and chocolate chips, and slid into the seat across from her. She beamed at him. He forced another smile. "Daddy?" she asked around a bite. "Do judges wear capes?" He laughed, genuinely this time. "Not usually, just robes, like really boring superheroes." Lily considered that, eyes narrowing. "Maybe you could be a judge. You're not boring." His heart clenched. "I don't think I'd be very good at telling people what to do." She giggled. "You tell me what to do all the time." He reached over and ruffled her hair. "That's different. I'm your dad." And as he watched her eat, cheeks full, eyes bright, he held on to the image, memorizing it. Because deep down, some part of him already knew, this might be the last morning like this for a long, long time. The courtroom was cold, too cold. Rachel Carter thought as she adjusted the collar of her robe and glanced down at the thick file in front of her. Case 19748, Bennett versus Bennett, custody hearing. She'd read the briefs last night after dinner, long after the city lights had flickered on and the silence of her apartment had settled in like a familiar weight. She had stayed up late, reviewing every affidavit, every financial statement, every school attendance record, as if reading it enough times might offer clarity where emotion threatened to cloud judgment. Now, seated high above the room in her elevated chair, Rachel kept her expression still, unreadable. A gavel rested within reach, but she didn't touch it. Her fingers remained laced in front of her, her eyes drifting between the two parents seated across from one another at their respective tables. The mother, Allison Bennett, sat with her attorney, polished and confident in her tailored suit. She glanced occasionally at the judge, at ease with the quiet power of the court. Her posture was perfect, her tone careful. Beside her sat a binder, thick with documentation. Michael Bennett, on the other hand, sat alone. His suit jacket didn't quite fit, the sleeves a touch too short, and the tie around his neck looked borrowed or forgotten until the last minute. But his eyes, Rachel noticed, never left the floor, except when they flicked toward the gallery, where a school counselor waited to speak on his behalf. The weariness in his face wasn't rehearsed. It was lived in. As the arguments began, Rachel took notes in tight, efficient strokes. The mother's lawyer spoke first, citing missed school days, a modest income, an unstable schedule. Facts, he called them. Then came Michael's voice, steady but strained as he described bedtime routines, pancakes on Saturdays, the nights spent helping Lily through fevers with nothing but wet towels and hope. Rachel didn't blink. She couldn't afford to. Fairness had no room for feeling. But when Michael looked up just once and locked eyes with her for the briefest moment, Something inside her cracked. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't desperate. He was just there. Present. Honest. Human. And it was that humanity she'd have to ignore when she made her ruling. Because justice didn't care who tucked the child in at night. Only who could afford to. The air in the courtroom thickened as Allison's lawyer stood, straightening his already perfect tie like he was preparing for a performance rather than a cross-examination. Martin Hale was a man built for courtroom stall, immaculately dressed, and armed with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of tearing people apart with a smile. He approached the witness stand slowly, the click of his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor like punctuation marks. Michael sat there, upright but visibly tense, hands clasped tightly in his lap. His tie had come slightly loose since this morning. The courtroom lighting seemed harsher now, catching on the dark circles under his eyes and the wrinkle forming between his brows. "Mr. Bennett," Hale began, voice smooth, practiced, "would you consider yourself financially stable?" Michael's mouth opened, closed. "I do the best I can." Hale tilted his head. That wasn't the question. A pause. "No," Michael admitted. "Not always, but Lily's never gone without." "But she has missed school days, correct?" Hale cut in, flipping through his file theatrically. "Records show 5 absences in the last 2 months." Michael's jaw tightened. "She had the flu. I stayed home with her." "Because you couldn't afford childcare, correct?" "I wanted to be there for her." "Yes or no, Mr. Bennett?" Michael's silence was answer enough. From her seat on the bench, Judge Rachel Carter remained expressionless, but her eyes never left Michael. She was listening not just to the words, but to what was being said between them. Hale moved in closer, sensing momentum. "You live in a 1-bedroom apartment over a mechanic shop. Your work hours are unpredictable. You bring Lily to the garage during late shifts sometimes, don't you?" Michael hesitated. "Only when I have no other choice." "Is that what you'd call a stable environment for a child?" Michael's eyes darkened. "She's loved. That's always been enough." Hale offered a thin, rehearsed smile. "Unfortunately, Mr. Bennett, the court doesn't weigh love on a financial scale." Michael looked over at Rachel then, for just a second. Not to beg, not to plead, just to be seen. For what he was. A father doing everything he could with what little he had. But this courtroom didn't run on heart, it ran on evidence. And in that moment, Michael could feel the verdict slipping through his fingers long before it was ever spoken. The courtroom was silent unnaturally so as Judge Rachel Carter adjusted her robe and cleared her throat. The final pages of her ruling rested on the bench before her, the ink still fresh, though the decision had been written in her mind long before this moment. Procedure, precedent, welfare. All the words that were supposed to guide justice now felt like thin excuses for something heavier. Michael sat at the respondent's table, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly together as if holding them still could hold his world together too. Allison sat across from him, composed, her lawyer whispering something into her ear. She nodded once, but her eyes never left the judge. Rachel looked out across the room, her gaze lingering for a heartbeat longer than it should have on Michael. "This court," she began, her voice even, formal, cold in ways that hurt her more than she would ever admit, "finds that in the best interest of the child, Lily Bennett, primary physical custody will be granted to the petitioner, Allison Bennett." Michael didn't move. He didn't blink. The words crashed over him like a wave, but his body stayed frozen numb. Rachel continued speaking, outlining visitation schedules, weekend rights, and counseling requirements, but Michael barely heard a word. His ears filled with a sound he couldn't place at first, a kind of roaring silence, louder than any cry. Then, just as she was finishing, movement to his right caught his eye. Lily. She had slipped free from her mother's grasp, and was running small arms, reaching out, face streaked with tears. "Daddy!" Michael caught her, lifting her into his arms before anyone could stop her. She clung to him, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. "I don't want to go," she whispered. Michael held her tighter, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other gripping her small frame like she might vanish if he let go. His throat burned. He couldn't speak. Across the bench, Rachel's composure fractured. Her jaw tensed, and for a brief moment, her eyes welled with something dangerously close to tears. She looked down. The bailiff stepped forward, hesitant. Michael kissed the top of Lily's head. "Be brave, okay? I'm right here, always." And when he finally let her go, it felt like tearing his own heart out by the roots. As the doors closed behind them, and the echo of Lily's cries faded down the hall, Rachel Carter remained still, but her hand hidden beneath the bench were trembling. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, sealing the judge's chambers in a thick, suffocating silence. Rachel Carter stood motionless in the center of the room, still clad in her black robe, though it now felt less like a uniform and more like a shroud. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, the only sound in a space that had once felt like control and now felt like confinement. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Walking to her desk, she sat down slowly, deliberately, as if every movement required careful thought. The legal file sat in front of Hertha Bennett cast neatly closed, as though the weight of what had just happened could be contained by a folder and a paperclip. She stared at it without really seeing, her eyes unfocused, her thoughts spiraling. Lily's face. It hovered in her mind with devastating clarity. The moment the little girl broke free, those arms outstretched, the panic in her voice. "Daddy!" Not defiance, not confusion, pure instinct. That cry had cracked something deep in Rachel's chest, something she'd buried years ago beneath layers of statutes, procedures, and robes. She stood abruptly, pacing to the bookshelf, where rows of legal volumes lined the wall stacks she once devoured, the very foundation of her beliefs. She ran her fingers along their spines, pausing at a worn copy of family law and custody guidelines. Her hand dropped away. The law was supposed to protect the vulnerable. That's why she'd entered it. But today, it had failed. "You did what was right," she told herself. "You followed protocol. You considered the facts. You made a fair ruling." And yet, no ruling had ever left her feeling like this. She pressed her palms against the desk, trying to steady herself, but her shoulders shook anyway. A sound escaped her small at first, then fuller, more raw. It wasn't quite a sob, not yet, but it was coming. When the tears finally fell, there was no one there to see them. No jury. No gallery. No gavel to strike order. Just Rachel, alone behind the robe, grieving a choice she was trained to make but couldn't live with. The scent of burnt coffee lingered in the break room, bitter and stale, but Rachel barely noticed as she sat at the small round table, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that hadn't seen fresh ground since morning. Across from her, Judge Elaine Parks leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, watching Rachel with quiet concern. "You look like hell," Elaine said, not unkindly. Rachel offered a tired smile, the kind that didn't ask for comfort. "That's because I feel like hell." Elaine took a sip from her own mug, waiting. She knew better than to push. Rachel Carter didn't unravel easily. But today, something was different. There was a fraying at the edges, a weight in her eyes she wasn't hiding. "It was the Bennett case," Rachel finally said, her voice low. "Custody hearing. I ruled in favor of the mother." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Problem?" Rachel stared down into her coffee, as if it might offer an answer she'd missed. "No. Not legally. Everything was by the book. Stable income, better housing, reliable child care. All the checkboxes. But," Elaine prompted. Rachel's fingers tightened around the mug. "But it didn't feel right." The silence stretched. "I watched that little girl cling to her father like he was the only solid thing left in her world," Rachel continued, her voice growing more strained. "And when I ruled against him, the way she cried, the way he held her like he was breaking and trying not to show it." She stopped, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "I've always believed in the law," she said finally, "that if I stuck to the facts and kept emotion out of it, I could protect people, do good. But for the first time, I'm not sure I made the right call." Elaine nodded slowly, setting her mug down. "The law isn't perfect, Rachel. It's not built for feelings. That's the burden we carry. But what if this time," Rachel whispered, "what if the law got it wrong?" Elaine didn't answer, because sometimes silence is the only thing honest enough to hold the weight of a judge's doubt. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the city park, casting long shadows between the trees and warming the cool spring air. Families clustered on picnic blankets. Children darted through the playground, their laughter floating above the rustle of leaves. It was a world moving on, unaware of heartbreak, tucked between its ordinary moments. Rachel Carter hadn't meant to stop. She had just finished a mediation downtown and decided to walk instead of heading straight home. Her heels clicked softly along the stone path, the rhythmic sound offering a thin distraction from the thoughts she couldn't shake. Then she saw him. Michael Bennett sat on a weather-worn bench beneath a sprawling oak, alone. His posture was still, but not relaxed, arms resting on his thighs, head slightly bowed. In his hands, crumpled but carefully held, was a piece of paper. Not a file, not a legal document, a child's drawing. Rachel slowed instinctively, her breath catching. It was Lily's. She recognized the shaky handwriting from the file, the bright swirls of marker, a lopsided heart, and stick figures labeled "Me" and "Daddy." Michael stared at it like it was the last good thing he had left in the world. She didn't mean to watch him. She should have kept walking. But her feet refused. There was something about the way he sat utterly still in the middle of all that motion that struck her. Not angry, not bitter, just quiet. A man absorbing loss in the only place he could without falling apart. She moved closer before she realized she was doing it. He looked up as she approached, their eyes locking. Recognition flickered. His expression didn't harden, didn't change into something polite or accusatory. He simply saw her. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she said, voice soft, unsure. Michael gave a half shrug. "Didn't plan on it. Just needed somewhere to breathe." She nodded slowly, glancing down at the drawing. "That's hers, isn't it?" He looked back at the paper, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, more ache than warmth. "She drew it the night before court. Told me to keep it with me, so I wouldn't forget her." Rachel felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. "I don't think you ever could," she whispered. Michael didn't answer. He didn't have to. Rachel hesitated at the edge of the bench, her shadow falling long across the grass. Michael didn't move, didn't look up again. He just sat there, the child's drawing still clutched in his hands, the wind teasing the edges like it wanted to carry it away. She could have walked past, should have. But the silence between them felt fuller than words, like something waiting to be broken gently, not ignored. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, voice quieter than before. He glanced over, then nodded once. "Sure." The bench creaked under her as she settled beside him, the space between them narrow but loaded. She didn't wear her robe here, didn't carry her gavel. Here, she was just Rachel. And he was just a man trying not to fall apart in public. "I don't usually come here," she offered. "Me either," he replied. "I used to bring Lily sometimes. She liked the ducks." Rachel nodded, her eyes drifting toward the small pond in the distance. A few ducks bobbed near the edge, trailing ripples behind them. "I almost forgot how loud the world can be when you're quiet." Michael gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, funny how that works." They sat in silence for a beat, letting the sounds of children laughing and birds overhead fill the space. Then Rachel said carefully, "I've been thinking about you. And Lily." He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was low, tired. "You don't have to say anything. I get it. You did your job." "I know I did," she said. "But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt." Michael looked at her, then really looked, and something shifted in his face. Not forgiveness, not anger, just recognition, of pain, of weight, carried alone. "I miss her," he said simply. Rachel's throat tightened. I know. She drew that picture for me, like it was armor, he said, unfolding the crinkled paper. Told me to be brave. I couldn't tell her I was scared. Rachel stared at the drawing. She's lucky to have someone who loves her that deeply. She deserves better, he whispered. No, Rachel said, barely louder than the wind. She deserves you. And in that moment, there were no titles, no bench between them. Just two people sitting side by side in the aftermath of something broken, finally speaking the truth. The mornings were the worst. The sun still rose like nothing had changed, spilling light across the faded carpet of Michael's apartment, but everything was different now. Lily's bed sat empty in the corner, sheets rumpled but untouched. Her stuffed bunny, Jupiter, slumped against the pillow like it had given up, waiting for her to come back. Michael sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, untouched. The silence pressed in, heavier with each day. No sleepy footsteps, no cereal spilled on the floor. No giggles, as she tried to brush her own hair and got it hopelessly tangled. It had been 4 days since the hearing. 4 days since her small hand slipped from his. He tried to stay busy, took on every repair job at the garage, worked late into the night, let the grime and the clang of tools drown out the ache in his chest. But when he finally came home, the quiet was unbearable. And every night, like a film loop he couldn't turn off, he replayed the park. Rachel, her unexpected appearance, had unsettled something in him. Not anger, not even confusion, just surprise. She had looked so different without the Robeso human, and when she'd sat beside him, he hadn't seen a judge. He'd seen a woman carrying something heavy. She had said Lily deserved him. The words stuck with him, echoing louder than anything the lawyers had said in court. They didn't fix anything, didn't bring Lily back, but they settled in the hollow space where hope used to live. Still, he didn't know what to make of it. Why she came. Why she cared. He reached into his wallet and pulled out Lily's drawing. It was creased now, the ink faded at the corners, but her smiling stick figure still held his hand with a red crayon heart drawn between them. He closed his eyes. Be brave, Daddy, she had told him. He wasn't sure he could be. Not yet, but her voice stayed with him. And now, so did Rachel's. The bell above the garage door chimed with a soft ding, half lost beneath the clatter of tools and the low rumble of an engine in need of coaxing back to life. Michael wiped his hands on a grease-streaked rag, his back to the front, expecting a delivery or maybe a last-minute customer before closing. Be right with you, he called, voice weary from a long shift. When he turned, he froze. Rachel Carter stood just inside the doorway, hair swept into a low knot, sleeves rolled up on a cream blouse already dusted with road grit. She didn't look like a judge today. She looked like someone who'd been driving too fast, thinking too much, and landed exactly where she hadn't planned. Flat tire, she said, lifting a brow slightly. Front right. I think I hit a curb. Or maybe karma. Michael blinked, then managed a half smile. You know, most people don't dress this nicely for a breakdown. Rachel shrugged. Old habits. He gestured to the open bay. Pull her in. Let's take a look. A few minutes later, the car was up on the jack, and Michael was crouched beside it, inspecting the tire. Rachel stood nearby, arms folded, eyes watching him in that calm, careful way she always had. But there was something different, now, something softer beneath the composed surface. I didn't come here just for the tire, she said after a beat. Michael didn't look up. No? She shook her head slowly. I could have gone anywhere. I know that sounds ridiculous. He finished tightening a lug nut before standing, wiping his hands again. So why here? Rachel looked at him, eyes searching. I needed to see if you were okay. Michael stared at her, unsure how to answer. I'm getting by. Getting by doesn't look like sleeping 3 hours a night and living on black coffee. He gave a dry laugh. Then I guess I'm doing great. She smiled, faintly. You don't have to talk. I just wanted to show up. Michael studied her for a long moment, surprised by the honesty in her face. No courtroom? No bench. Just two people who had somehow become tethered by the same loss. "Thanks for coming," he said at last. She nodded. "Thanks for fixing the tire." Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. Not yet. The rhythmic hiss of the air compressor filled the garage, blending with the steady clink of metal and the low hum of a late afternoon breeze. Michael crouched beside Rachel's car, tightening bolts and checking pressure, but his movements were slower than usual. Not out of fatigue, though. It had been a long week, but because of her. Rachel stood a few feet away, leaning against the garage wall, her arms relaxed now, fingers no longer knotted together in front of her like she was testifying. The hard edges she wore in the courtroom had softened, her voice warmer, her gaze more open. "I used to think I was helping people," she said quietly, watching him work. "Every ruling, every line of the law, I believed it all meant something. That it made a difference." Michael didn't look up. What changed? She hesitated. "You did." He paused, glanced at her, eyes narrowing just slightly in surprise. "I've read hundreds of case files," she continued. "But none of them stayed with me like yours did. The way Lily looked at you, the way you looked at her. I don't know if I've ever seen a bond like that before." Michael stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. "And still, I lost her." Rachel nodded slowly. "I know." For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the jack as Michael lowered the car back to the ground. "I didn't come here for pity," he said. "I know," she replied. He crossed his arms, studying her. "So why did you come?" Rachel exhaled, then smiled, not polished, not practiced, but real. "Because I didn't want you to think I forgot about you, or her, or what that decision cost." Michael leaned back against the workbench, rubbing his jaw. "Most people don't care once the case is closed." "I'm not most people," she said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, quiet, but undeniable. Not verdicts, not rules. Just two people, standing in the wreckage of something bigger than either of them, trying to make sense of the pieces. Michael nodded toward the car. "You're good to go, tires patched." Rachel smiled again, this time with something lingering behind it. "Thanks, Michael." "Anytime," he said, and meant it. The light outside the garage had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Most of the town had already closed up shop for the night, but neither Michael nor Rachel seemed in a hurry to move. They sat on two upturned milk crates just outside the bay doors, sipping from mismatched coffee cups and watching the slow crawl of twilight settle over the street. It was Rachel who broke the silence first. "I was married once," she said, her voice calm but distant. "His name was Daniel. We were together for 7 years. He was a surgeon, brilliant, driven. We thought we had it all figured out." Michael looked over at her, eyebrows raised just slightly. He hadn't expected that. She didn't wear her past the way he did, worn down at the edges, stitched together by circumstance. "What happened?" he asked gently. Rachel stared out at the sky, its soft blue deepening into indigo. "We lost a baby. 2nd trimester. A girl." She paused. "And we never really recovered after that." Michael didn't speak, just listened. "It was like everything cracked open. He buried himself in work. I buried myself in the law. We stopped talking about her. Then we stopped talking about anything." She turned to face him, eyes steady. "That's when I decided to become a judge. I thought, if I couldn't protect my own, maybe I could protect someone else's." Michael sat with that for a long moment, nodding slowly. "You still wear your ring?" he asked, noticing the thin gold band on her right hand. Rachel glanced down at her hand. "No, this one's not from him. It's my mother's. She raised me by herself after my dad left. Never had much, but she gave me everything that mattered." A breeze passed through, lifting strands of her hair. Michael watched her tuck them behind her ear, her composure briefly slipping into something more vulnerable. "You've lost things too," she said, not as a question. He nodded. "Yeah, but I never thought I'd lose Lily. Not like this." Rachel met his gaze. "I don't think you've lost her, Michael. I think the world just got it wrong." And in the quiet that followed, their lives once strangers felt suddenly, irrevocably parallel. The courthouse hallway echoed with the sharp clicks of heels and the low murmur of conversations behind closed doors. Rachel Carter walked briskly, her file tucked tight beneath her arm, face composed as always. But inside, her thoughts were unraveling thread by thread. She hadn't meant to overhear. She hadn't been looking for anything. But she'd paused outside the clerk's office, just long enough to catch the voice of a family services officer chatting with an attorney. It was Lily's name that froze her in place. "Yeah, I checked in last week. Kid's been with a nanny 4 nights in a row. Mom's been flying to New York for work again." Rachel's heart dropped. "Allison Bennett?" the attorney asked. "Yep, she's barely around. The house is spotless, sure, and the fridge is full, but that girl, she looks like she's waiting for someone to come home, and she knows it's not the sitter." Rachel moved away before they noticed her. Down the corridor. Into her chambers. She closed the door behind her with a click that sounded louder than it should have. She stood still for a moment. Just breathing. This wasn't in the testimony. Allison had presented herself as a full-time, hands-on parent with a stable schedule and home environment. The nanny had been framed as occasional support, reliable, harmless, professional. But 4 nights a week? Rachel sat down slowly, her hands trembling just slightly as she opened the Bennett file again. The ink was as neat as ever. The affidavits were all in order. But suddenly, it all looked wrong. "I made a decision based on what I was given," she reminded herself. "I followed the rules. But the rules didn't include late-night flights and lonely dinners. The rules didn't see Lily waiting at a window for someone who wouldn't come. And what stung the most was knowing who had been there. Michael. Every time. Until Rachel's rulings severed that bond like it was just another line in a judgment. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingers to her temple. This wasn't just a legal error. It was a human one. And it was hers. For the first time in her career, Rachel Carter didn't just regret the ruling. She regretted following the law instead of her heart. The glow from Rachel's computer screen cast pale light across her otherwise dark office. Outside her window, the city had quieted, the hum of traffic reduced to an occasional whisper beneath the stillness of night. The courthouse was empty now, save for a few janitors finishing their rounds and the occasional creak of the old building settling into silence. She stared at the cursor blinking on the Legal Forum's homepage. It was the 3rd time she had typed out her question and the 3rd time she had deleted it. Can a custody case be reopened if new information comes to light about the custodial parent's absence? It sounded innocent, academic, like a student asking for clarification. But Rachel knew the weight behind it. She knew the unspoken name at the center of it all, Lily Bennett. And she knew that if anyone traced this back to her, her entire career would be on the line. Judges didn't question their rulings at least not publicly. And certainly not online, at midnight, under a pseudonym. Still, she typed it again, slightly differently this time. Just enough to feel one step removed. If significant information is withheld during a custody trial specifically regarding the custodial parent's prolonged absenceasis, there's legal precedent to revisit the ruling. She hesitated over the submit button. Every fiber of her training told her to stop, to close the laptop, to forget the park bench and Michael's quiet heartbreak, to forget Lily's drawing and the way her small voice echoed, "I don't want to go." But her hand clicked the mouse anyway. The screen refreshed. The post was live. She leaned back, her heart pounding harder than it had during any verdict she'd ever delivered. She wasn't supposed to care like this. Not this deeply. Not enough to risk everything she'd built. The law demanded distance, impartiality. But she wasn't impartial anymore, not when she knew she might have made a mistake that cost a little girl her father. She stared at the screen, waiting for a response, for direction, for anything to justify what she already knew in her gut. There were lines judges shouldn't cross. But sometimes, doing nothing felt like the greater crime. The community center's visitation room was painted in soft, cheery pastels, but nothing about it felt warm. The chairs were too stiff, the fluorescent lights too bright, and the watchful eyes of the court-appointed monitor in the corner made every movement feel like it might be catalogued and filed away. Michael sat at the small round table, his hands folded around a small wooden box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a faded ribbon. He stared at the clock. 4 minutes past 2. They were late. Then the door opened. Lily entered slowly, her tiny hand in the grip of a strange-era young woman with a clipboard and a polite, distant smile. "There she is," Michael said, standing up, heart thudding like it hadn't in weeks. Lily's face lit up. She broke away from the aide, rushing forward to hug him tight. "Daddy!" He knelt to meet her, arms wrapping around her small frame like he could somehow protect her from everything, even here. Her hair smelled like strawberries, and her cheeks were rosy from the cold outside. "Happy birthday, baby girl," he whispered into her hair. She pulled back, beaming. "I'm 7 now. That's almost a grown-up." Michael chuckled. Almost. They sat together, and he reached for the small package on the table. "I made you something," he said, pushing it gently toward her. Lily untied the ribbon carefully, the way he'd taught her. Inside was a small, hand-carved music box, polished smooth, the lid engraved with stars and a little moon. When she opened it, a soft, tinkling melody, Pleiada lullaby. He used to hum when she couldn't sleep. Her eyes widened. "You made this?" He nodded. "Every piece. Took me a while. Thought maybe you'd want something that sounded like home." Lily turned the crank again, mesmerized. "It does." Michael swallowed the lump rising in his throat. The aide coughed gently, glancing at her watch. 5 more minutes. "Already?" Lily hugged him again, tighter this time. "Can I come home soon, Daddy?" He didn't answer right away. Just held her, letting the music play, and whispered, "I'm trying, sweetheart. I'm trying every day." The envelope was small, slightly wrinkled, and tucked between stacks of official documents on Rachel's desk. No return address, no markings, just her name in uneven, looping handwriting across the front. Judge Carter. She almost didn't open it right away. It had been a long morning of back-to-back hearings and too much coffee, and she assumed it was another overlooked note from a clerk or an administrative slip. But something about the handwriting so imperfect, so young, made her pause. She unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was lined, like it came from a second-grade notebook. The crayon drawings around the border were unmistakable. A big heart in the corner, a figure with long hair wearing a robe. Another figure with messy brown hair and big arms holding a child. Rachel's throat tightened before she even read the first word. "Dear Judge Carter, my name is Lily Bennett, and I'm 7 now. I just had my birthday. My dad made me a music box, and it sounds like stars. I love it. I know you made the choice for me to live with Mom. I think maybe you thought it was best. But I really miss my dad. A lot. He used to make pancakes on Saturdays and sing when I was scared. He holds my hand when I have bad dreams. I like my mom's house, but she's gone a lot. And the lady who stays with me is nice, but she doesn't smell like oil and cinnamon the way Daddy does. Sometimes I cry and try not to let her see. I don't want to make trouble. I just want to see my daddy more. Please. He's the only one who never lies to me. Thank you for reading this. I hope you're having a nice day. Love." Lily. Rachel sat back in her chair, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. She read the letter again, and then again. Each line dug deeper than the last. Not just because of the words, but because of the voice, clear, honest, without bitterness or manipulation. Just a little girl asking for something no law book could measure. She had followed the law, but now the law was staring her in the face, in crayon and pencil and heartbreak, and it was asking the one question she'd been trying to avoid. What if you were wrong? The letter lay flat on Rachel's desk, its creases smoothed from how many times she had unfolded and refolded it. The childish handwriting danced across the page in shaky lines. Some words pressed hard into the paper, like Lily had wanted to make sure they wouldn't be missed. Rachel's fingers hovered above the edge for a long moment before she picked it up again. He's the only one who never lies to me. That line hit the hardest. She read the letter once more, this time aloud, her voice quiet in the stillness of her chambers. Each sentence landed like a stone in her chest, small, steady, relentless. She imagined Lily sitting at a kitchen table, tongue between her teeth, carefully sounding out each word as she wrote. No lawyer. No argument, just truth. Rachel didn't cry. Not quite. But her throat ached with the pressure of what she was holding back. When the last word slipped past her lips, she set the letter down gently, as though afraid of hurting it. Outside, the courthouse moved on, judges handing down decisions, clerks stamping files, the system spinning forward with all the indifference of a well-oiled machine. But inside this room, time had slowed to a crawl. Rachel reached for the small brass key in her top drawer and opened the narrow filing cabinet beside her desk. She slipped the letter into a plain envelope, sealed it with shaking hands, and tucked it in the back corner of the drawer behind the files, behind the records. Somewhere it wouldn't be found. Somewhere safe. Then she locked it. But the truth was, it didn't matter where she put the letter. It was already inside her. Every word, every crayon-drawn heart, every quiet plea from a little girl who wasn't supposed to have to ask to see the one person who made her feel whole. Rachel closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her temples. She had followed the law. She had done everything by the book. And yet, somehow, Lily's letter weighed more than the entire case file ever had. The doorbell rang just as Rachel was pulling the lasagna from the oven, the smell of roasted garlic and basil thick in the air. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, nerves humming beneath her calm exterior. It was just dinner. A simple, quiet meal. Nothing formal. Nothing improper. She repeated the words in her head like a defense. But when she opened the door and saw Michael standing there, jeans still stained from the shop, hair slightly tousled, a bottle of wine in one hand and a hesitant smile on his face, every line she'd drawn in her mind blurred a little more. "Hope I'm not early," he said. Rachel shook her head. "No, you're right on time." He stepped inside slowly, taking in the space. Her apartment was modern but lived in, walls lined with books instead of artwork, a faint record playing in the background, jazz, low and steady. "Didn't expect you to be the cooking type," he said, eyeing the table already set for two. Rachel shrugged, a little too casually. "I said we'd talk strategy. Figured we might as well eat." "Right," he said, though something in his tone hinted he knew better. They sat across from each other, steam rising from their plates, the clink of silverware filling the silence for the first few minutes. She had notes beside her plate, legal printouts, custody case precedents, outlines of procedural motions. Untouched. "I've been thinking about the letter," she said finally. Michael looked up, brow furrowing. "You read it?" She nodded. "I don't know who sent it, but it found me." He set down his fork. That was Lily. Her words. Rachel didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at her glass of wine, swirling it slowly. It said more than a dozen depositions ever could. Michael watched her closely. "So what happens now?" "That's complicated," she said, her voice softer than before. "Legally, my hands are tied, but personally," she trailed off. "You care," he said, not as a question. She met his eyes. "I do." The room quieted. Not awkwardly, but like something had shifted. The wine, the food, the pretense of strategy, all felt thinner now. Transparent. Michael smiled faintly. "This doesn't feel like court anymore." Rachel leaned back, her expression unreadable except in her eyes. "No," she said. "It doesn't." It started with laughter, quiet at first, hesitant, the kind that slips out unexpectedly when two people realize they don't have to pretend. Rachel and Michael sat on her balcony under a string of warm patio lights, the city glowing in the distance, a second bottle of wine between them. The air was cool, but not cold, and the space between them had slowly, almost imperceptibly, begun to disappear. "I still can't believe you fixed your first engine with a paperclip and duct tape," Rachel said, smiling wide, eyes glassy from the wine. Michael chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Desperate times. It was either that or walk 20 miles with Lily on my shoulders in the middle of January." Rachel leaned her head against the railing, her smile softening. "You always talk about her like she's still right beside you." "She is," he said simply. "Everywhere I go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, true, and laced with something unspoken. Rachel looked down, fiddling with the stem of her wineglass. "You know, I never thought I'd sit like this with you. After what the court did." He glanced at her, eyes narrowing gently. "You didn't do it to hurt me." "No," she said. "But I still did it." The wind stirred her hair, brushing it across her face. Michael reached out instinctively, tucking it behind her ear. His fingers grazed her cheek, and, for a moment, neither of them moved. The touch lingered too long to be innocent, too short to be decisive. "I should feel angry," he said, voice low. "But I don't. I don't know what that says about me." Rachel's gaze didn't flinch. "Maybe it says you see me as more than the robe I wear." He looked away, down to the quiet street below. "That scares me a little." "Me too," she admitted. They sat in silence then, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the things they wanted to say didn't belong in words. "Not yet." Michael stood after a while, slow and uncertain. "I should go." Rachel followed him to the door, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his jacket. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, real, fragile, and far too dangerous. Neither said good night, because some things felt too close to goodbye. The silence in Judge Carter's chambers was broken only by the soft hum of her desktop computer and the subtle ticking of the old clock mounted on the wall behind her. She should have stopped. She knew that. But her hand hovered over the mouse, her eyes scanning the screen, heart pounding as she clicked open the file she had no business touching. Bennett v. Bennett. Custody Review. Sealed Addendum. Private Visitation Reports. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't permitted. The case was closed, the ruling final. But the moment Lily's letter arrived, everything changed. And now, Rachel needed to know, had she missed something? Had someone lied? Were there signs she failed to see? She read quickly, methodically, notes from the child welfare officer, private counselor logs, schedules that contradicted sworn testimony. Pages of time-stamped records confirmed what she had overheard in passing. Allison Bennett had not been the ever-present mother she claimed to be. A knock on her door snapped her out of the trance. She slammed the laptop shut, heart in her throat. "Come in." It was Julia Monroe, the courthouse clerk. Too sharp for her own good, and too connected not to be dangerous. "Judge Carter," she said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just wanted to drop off these filings from Department 2. Thought you might want them before the docket hits tomorrow." Rachel nodded, reaching for the folder. "Thank you, Julia," but Julia lingered. "Oh, before I forget. I passed by your office earlier and saw the system was still open under a sealed access level. Thought maybe it forgot to close out a session. You weren't in, so..." Rachel froze. "I'm sure it's nothing," Julia added, voice sweet as syrup. "But, you know how people talk when systems are accessed off. Ours especially on closed custody rulings." Rachel gave the faintest nod. "I'll take care of it." Julia smiled again. "Of course. Just looking out." When the door clicked shut behind her, Rachel let out a slow, shaky breath. It was done. She'd crossed a line and now the whispers would start. She could already hear them in the walls. Why is Judge Carter reviewing a sealed custody case? Is she involved with the father? She's slipping. And for the first time in her career, Rachel realized the law might not be what brought her down. It might be her conscience. The envelope was thin, but the weight of it landed like a stone on Rachel's desk. Her name was printed neatly across the front on Rachel Carter, followed by a small crimson-stamped seal, from the Judicial Ethics Oversight Board. She stared at it for a long time before opening it, heart pounding a slow, methodical rhythm against her ribs. Inside, one page. One paragraph. Notice of formal review. An ethics complaint has been filed citing possible judicial misconduct regarding the unauthorized access of sealed case files. An inquiry will be conducted to determine breach of protocol. That was it. No names, no details. Just a quiet, official dagger pointed directly at the foundation of her career. By noon, the whispers had turned into carefully constructed silence. Colleagues who usually lingered outside her chambers with coffee and case chatter now avoided eye contact. Judge Marcus, who once sought her opinion on everything from juvenile law to weekend bourbon selections, offered only a curt nod in passing. Even her longtime clerk, Dana Loyal, meticulous, kept her words clipped and her tone distant. Rachel moved through the courthouse like a ghost. She could feel the story curving around her in the air, filling the spaces between conversation. She accessed sealed records. It was the Bennett case, wasn't it? You think she's compromised? She wanted to scream the truth. That she hadn't done it for herself. That the girl in the Kezia, little girl who trusted her dad more than Enyana deserved, more than a system that favored income over connection. That sometimes justice wasn't black and white, but she knew the rules. She'd spent her whole life inside them. Now she was on the outside. That night, alone in her office long after the halls had emptied, she stared at the sealed envelope again. Her name looked foreign now, detached from the person she used to be. Not a judge. Not a symbol of impartiality. Just a woman who had dared to care a little too much. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the garage as Rachel stepped inside, coat damp and clinging to her shoulders. Michael looked up from beneath the hood of a pickup, the clang of his wrench pausing as he took her in, soaked, breathless. Like she hadn't stopped moving since the world started tilting. He wiped his hands on a rag and met her halfway across the concrete floor. "You okay?" "No," she said, the word catching in her throat. Not even close. She didn't wait for him to ask. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the letter, Lily's letter, now wrinkled at the corners from too many rereads. She handed it to him wordlessly, and he took it, confused, until he realized what it was. "You kept this?" he asked. "I read it almost every night," she said. "And then I opened your case file again. I looked through sealed reports. I broke protocol. Someone filed a complaint. They're opening an investigation." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "Why would you risk that?" "Because I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling now. "I ruled against you thinking I was protecting Lily, that I was following the law, but all I did was take her from the one person who never stopped showing up." He stared at her, searching her face for something: guilt, remorse, truth. It was all there. "I told myself I was being impartial," she continued. "But I wasn't. I was hiding, behind rules, behind robes, because that's easier than listening to your gut and making a decision that doesn't look clean on paper." "And now?" he asked quietly. Rachel swallowed hard. "Now I'm losing everything I worked for, my reputation, maybe even my seat on the bench." Michael looked at her for a long, heavy moment. "Why tell me all this?" She stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve to know, and because I needed you to see Minot as a judge, not as someone who hurt you, but as someone who wishes she hadn't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of pain, of honesty, of something fragile growing in the wreckage. And when Michael finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Now I see you. I just don't know what to do with that yet." Rachel nodded. "I don't either." But she stayed. And so did he. The courthouse felt different this time. Michael stood in the hallway outside Department 4, wearing the same suit he'd worn during the original hearing. It still didn't fit right, too snug across the shoulders, a little short in the sleeves, but it didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to fight. Again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Across from him, Rachel stood in silence, a thick manila folder clutched to her chest. Her robe was gone, so was the authority that once cloaked her like armor. In its place stood something rawer, braver, a woman who had stepped out of the safety of neutrality to stand beside the man she had once ruled against. "I pulled everything I could," she said quietly. Flight logs, nanny statements, security footage, even time-stamped delivery reports from the house. It paints a pretty clear picture of how often Lily's mother isn't there. Michael looked at her, unsure whether to thank her or question how surreal this all was. "You don't have to do this, you know." "Yes, I do," she said. "Because I helped take her from you. Now I want to help get her back." He nodded once, emotion flickering across his face. "You sure they'll even listen?" Rachel glanced toward the courtroom doors. "Maybe, maybe not, but you're not the man they painted in that first hearing. And I'm not the woman who sat behind that bench pretending she couldn't feel the truth in front of her." When the clerk called his name, Michael took a deep breath and stepped forward. The petition was submitted formally. Motion to reevaluate custody, based on new evidence. Inside the chamber, a different judge presided, new one, who raised an eyebrow as he reviewed the names on the paperwork. "Ms. Carter," he said slowly, recognizing her, "you're representing the father?" Rachel stepped forward. Not as counsel, as a witness, and as someone with first-hand knowledge of how this child's current living situation was misrepresented in court. A hush fell over the room. This was more than unusual. It was unprecedented. Michael watched her, heart pounding not. From fear this time, but from something unfamiliar. Hope. Real, fragile, impossible hope. By the next morning, Rachel's name was everywhere. Her photo snapped as she walked out of the courthouse beside Michael, her coat wrapped tight against the wind headlined the local paper and splashed across news sites. Former Judge Carter breaks silence, supports father in custody battle she once ruled against. The article ran with an undercurrent of scandal, but the headline was only half the story. On social media, the reactions split clean down the middle. She crossed the line. Judges don't get to rewrite their decisions because of guilt. This is what integrity looks like. Admitting you were wrong and doing something about it. She should be disbarred. She's the only one in that building with a soul. Talk shows picked it up. Podcasts dissected the ethics. Former colleagues refused comment, but their silence only fueled speculation. Rachel had gone from being one of the most respected family court judges in the county to the center of a public storm. And Michael? He stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but respect. He didn't want a media circus, he wanted Lily. And every headline, every camera flash, felt like a detour from what truly mattered. At the garage, customers whispered as they handed him keys. Some offered firm handshakes. Others offered wary glances. "Is it true?" one asked. "She's helping you now?" Michael just nodded. "Yeah, she is." At home, Rachel turned off her phone and muted the television. The noise outside was too loud, too fast, and none of it matched the stillness inside her. She sat by her window, Lily's letter folded gently in her lap. They were calling her a fallen judge. But the truth was simpler. She had stopped hiding behind the title. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something real. Whether the world saw her as brave or broken didn't matter anymore. Lily's voice still echoed in her mind, clear and unwavering. "I just want to see my daddy more." That was the only opinion that mattered now. The hearing room was colder than any courtroom Rachel had ever sat in. Not because of the temperature, but because of the silence, thick, expectant, edged with judgment that had nothing to do with laws or precedent. She stood at a small table in front of a panel of 3. 2 judges she'd once worked beside, and 1 civilian representative from the Judicial Oversight Committee. Behind them, the seal of the state court loomed like a final verdict already cast. Her palms were dry, her back straight. But inside, her chest tightened with each breath. "Judge Carter," the chairwoman began, voice clipped and cool, You are here today under review for breach of judicial conduct, specifically the unauthorized access of sealed case materials related to Bennett versus Bennett, a matter in which you presided. Rachel nodded once. Yes, ma'am. You are no longer assigned to the case. You had no legal authority to reopen or intervene. I understand. So? The chairwoman asked, fingers steepled. Why did you? Rachel took a breath. Not to steady herself, but to make sure she meant every word. Because I made a mistake, she said. Because I ruled by the book and ignored my instincts. I ignored what was obvious in front of me, that a child was being taken from the parent who knew her heart best. A flicker of surprise passed through the room. She didn't wait for them to respond. I accessed the sealed records not for personal gain, not out of bias, but to correct what I now believe was a moral failure. The custodial parent misrepresented critical facts under oath. I was misled. I should have seen it then. I didn't, so I acted now. A pause. I know I violated procedure. I know this may end my career, but if doing the right thing costs me the bench, I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was sitting back while a little girl lost the one person who never stopped fighting for her. Silence followed. Long and deep. Rachel didn't flinch under their gaze. She had already faced the most brutal judgment of all her own. The courtroom was filled with a different kind of silence, expectant, breathless, the kind that comes when even the walls seem to hold still. Michael sat at the front, his hands folded tightly in his lap, shoulders tense beneath the worn fabric of his blazer. Rachel was beside him, not at a podium, not in robes, just there, present, unmoving. A quiet strength beside a man still holding on to hope. And then the door opened. Lily entered holding the hand of a court-appointed child advocate. She wore a pale yellow dress, with her hair in 2 uneven braids, and a solemn look far too old for her 7 years. She didn't glance at the gallery. Her eyes scanned the room until they found her date, and then she smiled, just a little. The judge different this time, a woman with kind eyes, and a firm voice called for the room to settle. Miss Bennett, she said gently, we understand you've asked to speak today. Are you sure? Lily nodded. Yes, ma'am. She climbed up into the witness seat with a small boost from the bailiff, her feet swinging above the floor. The judge gave her a soft smile. Take your time. Lily looked down at the paper in her hands, but she didn't read it. She folded it instead, placed it in her lap, and looked straight ahead. I love my mom, she began. She's nice, and she buys me pretty dresses, and sometimes we have pancakes on Sunday. A beat. But I miss my dad, every day. He makes pancakes every Saturday, and he always remembers to put stars on my nightlight. He knows the words to my bedtime song. He knows when I'm faking a smile. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. My mom's gone a lot. She works hard. But sometimes I feel alone. And I don't feel alone when I'm with Daddy. She glanced at the judge, her voice soft but certain. I don't want to choose. I just want to be where it feels like home. And home is where Daddy is. No one spoke. No one had to. In that still, sacred moment, Lily's words carried more weight than any brief, any argument, any law. It was the truth pure and undeniable. And the court finally listened. The courtroom was packed, the tension wound tight enough to snap. Reporters lined the back rows, pens poised, eyes narrowed. Colleagues from the bench sat like shadows in the gallery, watching the Fowler redemption of one of their own. Rachel Carter took the stand without fanfare, no lawyer at her side, no legal shield between her and the storm. She wore a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, her expression calm but unflinching. The presiding judge, a senior justice from the state circuit, looked at her over the rim of his glasses. Judge Carter, you understand the gravity of your presence here today. I do, Rachel said evenly. You've been accused of unauthorized access of sealed custody files and of becoming personally involved with a litigant in a case you ruled on. Do you deny these actions? I don't. Her voice didn't waver. A rustle passed through the room. Then why, the judge asked slowly. "Should this court consider your actions anything less than a breach of judicial integrity?" Rachel looked down at her clasped hands for a moment before lifting her eyes. "Because I followed the law at the expense of a child's well-being," she said. "And when I realized that, I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. I accessed the sealed file not for personal gain, not out of bias, but because the evidence I once trusted was incomplete, and I had the power to uncover the truth." She paused, breath steady. "Yes, I crossed a line, but it was a line between rules and conscience. I never intended to betray the court. I intended to honor the spirit of justice that got buried beneath polished arguments and professional appearances." "And your relationship with Mr. Bennett?" Rachel's gaze didn't falter. "We were strangers before that case, but witnessing the pain I helped cause broke something in me. Our connection came from truth, from guilt, yes, from compassion. But never manipulation, never deceit." The room was quiet. "I won't apologize for protecting a child's heart," she finished. "Even if it costs me my seat, I would rather lose the robe than wear it while pretending that silence and correctness are the same as justice." The court reporter's fingers paused for a breath before continuing. The truth was now on record, and there was no taking it back. The courtroom was standing room only. Michael sat at the edge of the bench, hands clasped tightly, Lily's music box tucked inside his coat pocket like a charm. Rachel was 2 rows behind him, not in the robe, not at the stand, just a figure in a navy coat, calm and quiet, waiting like everyone else. Her suspension had already been drafted, pending the ruling. She hadn't fought it. She hadn't flinched. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning the papers before him, the room holding its collective breath. "In light of new evidence," he began, "including documented inconsistencies in the custodial parent's testimony, revised work and travel schedules, and the testimony of the child involved, this court finds sufficient cause to amend the original ruling." Michael's heart stopped. "It is the court's decision that primary custody will remain with the mother," the judge said, and a sick, cold wave crept over Michael's spine until the next words cut through. "But shared custody is hereby granted to the father, Michael Bennett. Visitation will no longer be supervised and will include alternating weekends, holidays, and a split summer schedule, effective immediately." Michael exhaled so hard he nearly collapsed into himself. His lawyer gripped his shoulder. A tear slid down his cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it. The judge continued, shifting his tone. "As for the matter of judicial conduct, the Oversight Board has reached its conclusion regarding former Judge Rachel Carter. While her actions constituted a breach of procedure, her motives were determined to be free of personal or financial gain. She acted out of conscience, not corruption." Rachel didn't move, not even when every eye turned to her. "As such," the judge said, "Ms. Monet, Carter will be suspended from the bench for an undetermined period, subject to review, but she will retain her license to practice law. Disbarment is not warranted." The gavel fell. 1 strike. Final. It was done. Michael turned around in the echo of it all and found Rachel's eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't need to, because Lily was coming home, and they had both finally done something that felt like justice. The front door creaked open with the same soft groan it always had, but this time, it sounded like music. Michael stood in the entryway, keys still in his hand, heart hammering in his chest, as a small figure stepped inside, behind him backpack slung over one shoulder, stuffed bunny in the other. Lily. She looked around the apartment like she was seeing it for the first time, even though every corner still held her fingerprints. Her eyes landed on the spot by the window where her beanbag chair used to sit, the scuff marks on the floor near the kitchen where she danced barefoot in pajamas. "Is it really okay?" she asked, her voice no louder than a whisper. Michael crouched down, opening his arms. "It's more than okay," he said. "You're home." She didn't hesitate. She dropped the bunny and launched forward, crashing into his chest with a hug so fierce it knocked the breath from him. He held her tightly, pressing his face into her hair, letting her warmth and the smell of strawberry shampoo and crayons ground him in a moment he'd dreamed of for months. "I missed you every day." she whispered. "I know, baby," he said, voice breaking. "Me too." That afternoon, the apartment came alive again. The silence that had hung in the air like dust was replaced by laughter. Michael found her favorite spoon in the back of the drawer. She found her missing sock behind the couch and declared it a miracle. They made pancakes for dinner burnt on the edges, just the way she liked. The man danced in the kitchen while music played too loud from his old stereo. Later, she curled up in bed with Jupiter tucked under one arm and the music box playing softly on the nightstand. Michael sat beside her until her eyes fluttered shut, her hand still curled around his thumb. He didn't move. Not for a long time. The world outside kept spinning. The court, the press, the aftermath, they could wait. Because tonight, his daughter was asleep in her bed. Safe. Loved. Home. The new office was nothing like the chambers Rachel had left behind. There were no marble floors, no polished plaques, no long corridors humming with quiet authority. Instead, the paint on the walls was fresh but imperfect, the windows overlooked a busy street corner, and the desk she sat behind was second-hand worn at the corners but sturdy. Honest. A cardboard box sat open beside her, filled with handwritten thank-you notes, news clippings from the Bennett case, and one small envelope she still hadn't brought herself to throw away. Lily's letter. It lived in the top drawer now, not hidden honored. Above her on the wall, a new sign had just gone up. Simple lettering on brushed wood, The Anchor Project. Legal advocacy for single parents. Rachel looked around the room, files already piling up, coffee machines sputtering in the corner, a young paralegal hunched over intake forms, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. She had traded in the bench for something less powerful on paper, but maybe more powerful in practice. Here, she didn't have to wait for cases to land on her docket. Here, she could choose to fight for the ones who couldn't afford high-powered lawyers or pristine records, people like Michael. Parents who loved fiercely but were written off because they didn't wear their love in court-approved formats. The door opened, and a woman stepped in with two small children in tow. Nervous, guarded, tired, in the way only someone in the middle of a custody battle could be. "Are you the one who helps people?" she asked. Rachel stood, offering a calm, steady smile. "That's why I'm here." They sat down together, voices low, kids playing with crayons in the corner, as Rachel listened, really listened. She took notes, asked questions, promised to fight. Not with a gavel this time. With grit, compassion, and everything the law had taught her, not about power, but about people. And when the woman left, hope flickering in her eyes, Rachel Carter sat back and exhaled. She was no longer Judge Carter. She was something else now. And maybe, just maybe, something more. The late autumn air was crisp, the kind that hinted at winter, but still clung to the last breath of warmth. Michael stood outside the Anchor Project's modest office, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the small wooden sign above the door. He'd heard what Rachel was doing, how she'd turned her fall from the bench into something that lifted others. It had made the news for a few days before fading back into the quiet corners where real change happened. But he hadn't reached out. Not yet. Until now. He stepped inside, the familiar jingle of a bell overhead, drawing Rachel's eyes up from a stack of case files. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she rose from her chair. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than the space deserved. Rachel smiled. Not the guarded kind she used to wear in court. This one was real. Tired, maybe, but open. "Hey, yourself." They stood for a long second in the silence, the weight of their shared history hanging not like a burden, but like something earned. The courtroom, the verdict, the fallout, it was all behind them now. What remained was what had survived it. "I thought I'd stop by," Michael said. "Lily wanted to bring you this." He handed her a folded piece of construction paper, covered in glitter and marker, a lopsided heart, and beneath it, in big block letters, "Thank you, Miss Rachel." Inside was a drawing of the three of them, Michael, Lily, and Rachel, holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Rachel blinked hard, emotion rising before she could hide it. "She's really something," she said. Michael smiled. "She is." They sat eventually, 2 cups of coffee between them, no court between them, no titles to uphold. "I meant to say this sooner," Michael said, his eyes steady. "You didn't just help Lily, you gave me a piece of myself back, the part I thought I lost when they took her away." Rachel looked down, fingers brushing the edge of the paper. "And you gave me something too, a reason to believe in what comes after the robe." They didn't speak for a while after that. They didn't need to. Because now, they weren't judge and defendant. They were 2 people who had walked through fire and come out the other side not unscathed, but standing, together. The park looked different now, though it hadn't changed much at all. Same old benches. Same winding path lined with maple trees, their leaves beginning to turn gold and crimson. Same playground where laughter echoed like a song across the grass. But for Michael and Rachel, everything had changed. They sat side by side on a worn wooden bench, a thermos of coffee between them, hands brushing once, then staying close. In front of them, Lily raced across the lawn with Jupiter tucked under one arm and a kite string in the other, her giggles rising like wind through the leaves. "1 year," Michael said. Watching her, Rachel nodded. "Feels longer, and shorter." "She asks about you more now," he added, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Like you've always been part of the story." Rachel smiled, her gaze fixed on Lily. "Maybe I have, just not from the beginning." Michael glanced at her, his voice quieter now. "You ever miss it, the bench?" She paused, considering. "Sometimes. The structure, the weight of it. But not the distance, not the way it asked me to feel less to serve more." He nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," she said, watching the kite lift higher into the blue. "I get to choose who I fight for. I get to feel everything, and I get to be here." He looked at her again, really, looked, not as a judge. Not even as the woman who once ruled against him, but as someone who chose to make things right. Rachel reached for the thermos and poured a little more into his cup. "You ever think about how strange it is? Everything we lost had to happen for us to find this?" Michael smiled, his eyes never leaving Lily. "Not strange," he said. "Just rare." The breeze picked up, carrying Lily's laughter back toward them, and with it, the quiet, undeniable truth that not all justice wears a robe. Sometimes, it looks like a father's second chance, a child's safety, and a woman who followed her heart all the way to redemption. Rachel leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, there was peace. The gavel was gone, but the heart remained.